Well, welcome everyone to this side event on accelerating the implementation of the Paris Agreement through innovative climate-resilient agri-food systems. My name is Zitouni Ouldada. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at FAO, and it's really my great pleasure to moderate this session today. And I'm very pleased to have panelists with me here live in Glasgow, and we also have other colleagues joining us virtually. So welcome everyone. So this is a hybrid format event. It will be recorded and it will be made available for everyone to watch afterward. So once we have opening remarks, we'll then have some keynote speeches, and after that we'll have a panel discussion. So for those of you joining us online, please post your questions, your comments on the chat box, anything you would like to share with us. And I'll pick up some of the questions that I'll ask our panelists here to answer them. So please join us so we can make this interactive, so it can be useful to everyone. Let me just say a couple of words to set the scene of the importance of this event and why it matters, particularly in this context of COP26. Agriculture and climate change are so interconnected, they affect each other, and in making sure so we have really unique opportunity, I would say, to establish green and climate resilient agri-food systems and show the importance of technological innovation at different levels of achieving such climate resilient and agri-food systems. So that's why we're pleased to organize this event in collaboration with WFP and IFAD, the Rome-based agencies, and we welcome you again all for joining us at this event. Without much ado, I would like now to welcome and invite our Deputy Director General, Ms. Maria Helena Semedo, to give her opening remark. Ms. Semedo, over to you.
Thank you, Zitouni, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all connecting from all around the world. Dear Yotsna, dear David, thank you very much for joining us. Dear panelists, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is pleased to convene this United Nations Food System event on behalf of the Rome-based agencies and in the presence of so many honorable guests. Today, 811 million people go hungry. 3 billion are not able to have a healthy diet. Climate change is one of the main drivers, further aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Both threaten to reverse years of hard-earned progress on eradicating hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. Our planet is at a critical turning point with only 9 years, that is 9 planting seasons left until 2030. The time is now. Dear participants, agri-food systems contribute to over 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions and are propelling ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss. We need to better understand the role of innovation in driving climate-resilient agri-food system transformation at all levels and achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. These last days, we have heard an ambitious announcement calling for bold actions to achieve the Paris Agreement. And I think we have the one on forest, we have another one on methane, and they are very good achievements and all linked to the agriculture sectors. But let's be clear, This cannot be achieved unless we make agriculture a central part of our solutions to the climate crisis. Almost half the solution to stay within agreed climate goals come from agri-food systems. 95% of all national determined contribution submitted ahead of COP26 prioritize climate action in agriculture. And the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture has firmly recognized the unique potential of agriculture to tackle climate change. At the opening of COP26, we heard Sir David Attenborough make a powerful call for a new industrial revolution powered by millions of sustainable innovation, and he was clear, leaving no one behind. Our agri-food systems are a front of such sustainable innovation. FAO and the Rome-based agencies promote innovation to transform agri-food systems along inclusive, sustainable, green, and climate-resilient agriculture pathways. They give greater recognition of the vulnerability, needs, and capacities of women, smallholder, indigenous people, and youth to enhance ambitious and effective climate action. To realize these commitments in agri-food systems, the flow of resources, technology, and capacities must be ambitiously scaled up. This calls for effective public-private partnership and policy coherence to improve digital infrastructure and skills in the rural areas of developing countries. And we need to promote inclusive and gender-responsive approach to build bridges and fill gaps with those who don't have access to digital technologies and knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, innovative solutions should have the power to disrupt business as usual. What it means? This means putting innovative agri-solutions in the hands of those who need it most. Here I refer to the world's 2.5 billion small-scale farmers, herders, fish forkers, and forest-dependent communities who are the most vulnerable to climate shocks and hazards and produce the food we consume. For example, FAO's 1,000 Digital Village initiative enable farmers to use digital technologies, information, and communication tools to promote local sustainable development and inclusion of farmers across the food value chain. FAO use digital innovation such as drones, satellite imaging, remote sensors, and mobile applications to provide climate information to smallholder farmers. A recent study shows that less than 2% of global climate finance goes to small-scale farmers in developing countries. We need to support countries to access climate funds from the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, development banks, and bilateral donors. Innovative and smart finance tools are vital. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, friends, it is time to unleash the untapped potential for innovation, from food production to consumption and waste management, to build green and resilient agri-food systems. From a carbon neutral and climate resilient future, we need to anchor innovation in policy, finance, and business models to transition to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food system. Together, we can and must step up innovative solutions for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all, leaving no one behind. Thank you again for joining us, and over to you, Zitouni.
Thank you very much, Maria Helena Semedo, for setting the scene nicely for us and highlighting so many pertinent points, which I hope are going to help us generate some discussion on those. Particularly your point on putting the agri-food system at the front of sustainable innovation and the need for public and private partnership for investment, including in rural areas, and also your point on disruption of business as usual through innovation. Thank you very much for those very pertinent points. Let me now invite our first keynote speaker, Ms. Jyotsna Puri, who's the Associate Vice President at IFAD. We're really pleased to have you with us, and thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Maria Elena and FAO for having me here. Please feel free to call me Jo, it's easier. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, delegates. With the climate emergency and the uncertainty and variability it represents, as well as the beleaguered state of biodiversity that we are witnessing today, we are in a space where we know that our food is in peril. Gains in technologies and innovations have so far not been sufficient for us to really deal with the kind of uncertainty and variability that climate events have meant for all of us. In this context, I want to share a number with all of you. 1/3. 1/3 is the total amount of emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions, that is contributed to by the agricultural sector. 1/3 is also the overall amount of food that is lost every year. And 1/3 is the amount of food on our plates. So imagine your plates in front of you that are produced by small-scale farmers. It's clear that this sector, that the agri-food sector, needs to be a big focus for us as we go forward. I have 3 overarching messages today. So just first to recap what those are. First, I think it's really important that we think about which innovations there are that we can scale up. The second, we need to think about inclusive and transparent approaches to implement these innovations. And the third is that we need to think in innovative ways about finance from public and private sectors. I'm going to dwell upon these very briefly. The first, innovations clearly need to be part of our overall agenda, and Maria Elena referred to this as she spoke about disruption. Some of the key ways that I see this space evolving as we go forward, for us to be really future fit, and for IFAD, for WFP, and for FAO to take some of these areas forward, as to think about some of the technologies that we've got available that we're not yet scaling up. One of them is blockchain. Blockchain technology is something that we have experimented with within IFAD, we have tested, and we know that it can be scaled up, especially because we are talking about transparent systems and transparent financial flows, so that we can understand how much of that dollar, which is very, very constrained anyway, is actually reaching the small-scale farmer. Blockchain technology provides us with that opportunity, and we've got to take advantage of it. We also have the opportunity of scaling up a lot of our digital ideas and innovations. E-vouchers that have been used by IFAD have really helped to provide financial inclusion services to farmers all across Africa. But we are also experimenting with different forms of insurance. Our work with FAO, for example, in the area of digressive insurance is showing us that not only do we have to think about mitigating, transferring, and coping mechanisms in the context of agricultural risk, But we can use digressive insurance to really create norms in this space that can slowly help to both change behavior on the ground, but also make us far more aware of some of the key challenges in the overall uptake of coping as well as risk transfer mechanisms such as insurance. These are all things that we are experimenting with and we are testing and we are trying to see where and how they can be scaled up. One of the other areas that we are focusing on is the use of grants as a catalytic source of financing for both testing and scaling. ASAP is one such opportunity. ASAP, or Adaptation in Smallholder Farmer Agriculture, is a program that IFAD has had now for almost 10 years. And the new incarnation of this is ASAP Plus. ASAP Plus represents both a grant as well as a loan modality through which we can support initial ideas, but also somewhat mature ideas to test and then to scale up, but also then use them to leverage the rest of the program of loan and grants that IFAD has to leverage this idea into far larger landscape levels. The program also allows for technology and knowledge transfer between countries and regions that can speed up the much needed food system transformation as well as disruption and adaptation in climate change and agriculture so that available technologies can be deployed rapidly and at a larger scale. The second idea is really of inclusive and transparent approaches. It is clear that we need to take everyone along, and this is really important. It's also ensconced in a very simple way of working that IFAD has adopted. So, for example, we have a division that looks at environment, climate, gender, nutrition, youth, and social inclusion all together, because we know that siloed approaches in this space have not worked, and we've got to break these walls between different disciplines if we want to present complex solutions to complex problems. IFAD is also working at the forefront of bringing in Indigenous people who represent not just innovation, but also traditional practices with neglected and underutilized species, as well as nature-based solutions that are clearly in making us far more resilient. In fact, one of the findings from the pandemic was that a lot of the communities of small-scale producers, as well as Indigenous peoples, were far more resilient in terms of their overall consumption, as well as incomes, than far greater and larger supply chain participants. And this was because they were depending on their systems of food production as well as consumption. In all of this, I think the needs of transparency and evidence are clear. It is important not just that we know how much is reaching the last mile, but how it is reaching and through what channels, so that we can really scale up those implementation procedures with the use of implementation science and good evidence on how things work and not just what works. What works was the mantra of the previous decade. I think we've got to start looking at how things work and how we should deliver better, because we know that every dollar has to count. The third is really looking at sources of finance. Public finance has a key role in de-risking and in innovating for climate resilience and low emission food systems. Grants that IFAD projects are used strategically to build capacity of our stakeholders, of farmers groups, of extension agents, of agricultural technicians, of water user groups, of agricultural cooperatives, of medium and small enterprises, of market actors, of local decision makers are crucial so that we can reduce our footprint as well as adapt. Development initiatives need to support the generation of global public goods and then convert them into new technologies and innovations that can be used at the local level. I think the public sector, especially, and international organizations have the ability to take on a lot of this risk, and that's what we should use them for. IFAD's investments build on the lessons that we have learned in our previous investments and projects so that we can keep learning and building our solutions, especially with respect to financing. One of the consequences of the Food Systems Summit was that IFAD is going to be co-leading the Public Development Bank platform so that we can sit together and think of solutions and operationalize solutions in the finance space that allow international organizations, but also private sectors to work together in a language that is similar for both. We are looking forward to working with FAO and others to ensure more rapid uptake of innovations and increasing the piloting of new ones with new and better evidence on what, not just what works, but how things work. As final words, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, Maria Elena, Chair, I would like to emphasize that we need to bring the private sector into building resilience and transforming food systems. And here, financial innovation is really key. This is critical so that commitments can turn into financial resources to support countries to help them adapt their agricultural sector to climate change. I'm looking forward to a very exciting panel discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for adding your perspectives. There's so many rich points and useful one you made there, particularly on your clear 3 key messages on scaling up innovation, on inclusivity, taking everyone on board, as you said, and also thinking in innovative ways with regard to finance. So thank you very much for those points. And now it's really my great pleasure to invite and welcome David Nabarro, who's a senior advisor. He's been actively engaged in the Food Systems Summit and holding food system dialogues all around the world. And I'm sure that the issue of innovation and transformation of agri-food systems has come up during those discussions. So it's my great pleasure to invite you, David, to give your perspectives. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Zituni, and to colleagues in FAO, IFAD, and WFP, who kindly invited me to join you today. Thank you, but most importantly, to all of you who are connected or in the auditorium. Wonderful, wonderful to be with you all. Now, time is tight, so let me just try to take you through aspects of the Food Systems Summit from my perspective. I mean, food is wonderful to work with. Food connects people to each other. Food connects people to nature. Food also connects us to the planet. And when we look at how food works in our lives, we see its importance for nutrition, for health, for environment, climate, biodiversity, rural economies, well-being of women, well-being of young people, well-being of indigenous people, well-being of all of society. In fact, food and food that we eat and food that is grown connects with all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. United Nations Secretary General decided that he would hold the first ever United Nations Summit on Food Systems, and it took place on the 23rd and 24th of September this year. Looking at food in systems requires understanding and working with the multiple perspectives that different stakeholders have on food. And given that there are so many of us with a stake, in fact, every single one of us has interest in food, it's just impossible to find a way to bring everybody to a single understanding of food and how it works. And so that's why we think in terms of food systems. But when working with systems, it's necessary to take account of one major reality, and that is everyone has a different view on the systems in which they live and in which they operate. And so in the Food Systems Summit, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the special envoy appointed by the United Nations Secretary General, asked that efforts were made to go down two tracks. The first was a science-based track where the challenges in food systems were identified and then worked on by expert groups called action tracks, who then came out with action areas in which game-changing solutions could be applied in order to shift systems so that they would be more sustainable, equitable, and resilient by 2030. And this was an immensely democratic exercise because it drew on suggestions from many hundreds of practitioners all over the world. The second track of preparation was one of multi-stakeholder engagement through independent, national, and global dialogues. And the dialogues were designed in a way that encouraged diversity and inclusion to explore options for moving forward with food systems, shifting them so that they brought all-round benefits to those with whom they were concerned, and doing it in a way that did not require groups to align around a single way of thought and action. And that was through exploratory dialogues, looking for options and then coming out with pathways to sustainable food systems for the future that all could follow. 148 countries involved themselves in these dialogues. And there were many hundred independent dialogues as well. Altogether, more than 107,000 people are known to have participated in the dialogue process. We suspect there were many more. And all this was done in the midst of the COVID pandemic. It's been an extraordinary process because it's led to 108 publicly posted pathways to food systems of the future. And in the follow-up to the summit, there's going to be intensive work on these pathways to reach sustainability by 2030 and to work through food to have an impact right across the sustainable development agenda, including, as you've already heard, on climate action and on biodiversity. I just want to finish by stressing to you that the process is still ongoing. Dialogues are still underway in many countries. Pathways are still the subject of a multi-stakeholder attention. And within all this, there's a huge innovation underway. Innovation in ways of engaging stakeholders inclusively, involving indigenous peoples, of course, but also smallholders and those who work in the food sector who are often very badly paid, and together with young people, women's groups, and more. But there's also innovation in technology, there's innovation in science, innovation in relations, innovation in ways of dealing with power asymmetries, and innovations in governance. So everybody, we look forward to working with you all on a systems approach to food that is in itself full of innovation, and innovation that's designed to lead to more equitable, sustainable, and resilient food systems for all that will contribute right across the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you for the chance to make these remarks.
Well, thank you very much, David. I'm really delighted that you're able to join us, and thank you very much for sharing with us your experience and highlighting the fact that food connects to all the SDGs and the food systems, as you said, because it's complex, then everyone has really different views of what the system is. And finally, I want to congratulate you on the fact that 148 countries had dialogues on food system. It's fantastic. And if you mobilized, you said 107,000 participants, that's more than any COP actually managed to mobilize in terms of participation. So please stay with us. I'll bring you in at some point during the discussion. So thank you again, David, Maria Elena, and Joe. Let me now move into the panelists that are with me here, present in person. And I have Thomas Duncan Jurado, who's the permanent representative of Panama to FAO, WFP, and IFAD. I have here Ezgi Barcenes, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Anheuser-Busch InBev, and Theo De Jager, who's the President of the World Farmers Organization. And our fourth panelist is Torgny Holmgren, who's the Executive Director of the Stockholm International Water Institute. So thank you, everyone, for joining us in person. Welcome again. So let me dive into the questions. And if I can ask you, Thomas, first the question, looking at the involvement of countries in the various agri-food systems discussions and also the need for transformation, and zoom in particularly to the upper middle income countries such as Panama. And if I may ask you, in your opinion, what do upper middle income countries require then to continue to make progress in technology investment in agri-food systems? And please, just remind all the speakers, 3 minutes each, so we can really have discussion with everyone. Over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Undoubtedly, one of the biggest challenges from this mission is making food systems more climate resilient is the financial resources or funding for the implementation of short and medium and long-term plans. From the perspective of an upper middle income country, it will be a non-reimbursable technical assistance for specialist agencies for feasibility studies that we allow to the countries to obtain financial and or direct their own funds for investing in technology and improve the agri-food system. Again, Panama are making some progress to achieve a more climate resilient agri-food system. Panama have a national plan until 2030 with established action basis on innovation, technology, and good practice. Currently, programs are being implemented to adapt to climate change through the country's water resources with agroforestry and silvopastoral systems in river basins, with catchment systems, sustainable livestock farming, and river reforestation. Currently, work is being done on the georeferences of the country's crop areas and to the monitoring of agricultural growth. Access to climate information for farmers is being strengthened to support decision making. Of course, the impact of the health emergency caused by COVID-19 had a negative impact on all the regions. For Panama, our GDP plummeted by 70.9%, putting pressure on the national budget. For this reason, countries like Panama and other countries from the world, we need these financial resources for part of the other countries. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Thomas. Let me now invite Ezgi, just to hear the views of a private company. So you're an international drink and brewing company based in Belgium. And if you could please just share us with your thoughts on what is your approach in driving action and innovation to sustainable agriculture and building resilient supply chains across your global value chain.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today to represent the private sector. Really exciting and inspiring conversation, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue later on as well. So as the world's local brewer with operations across 50+ countries around the world, we have a long-standing commitment to the local economies and communities where we live and work. And within that, a strong piece of it, a big piece of it is our agricultural supply chains. We, in fact, source, brew, and sell over 90% of our products locally. So again, that investment and that focus in local supply chains has really been key for us. And in many countries around the world, we work with tens of thousands of farmers, about 2/3 of which are smallholder farmers, which in many markets means that these farmers farm less than 1 hectare of land, which is about 2.5 acres of land. So as we look to shift them from subsistence farming into more commercial farming and offering them with access to markets, we really put farmer at the center of everything we do. We do take that farmer-centric approach in how we develop our agricultural development initiatives, how we have boots on the ground, and how we offer the agronomic advice and services to those farmers as well. The last thing I want to highlight is how we take again, putting the farmer at the heart of everything we do, a farmer-centric approach in our 2025 sustainability commitments. We are looking to have 100% of our direct farmers be skilled, connected, and financially empowered. And I think a lot of the comments made by earlier panelists and keynote speakers also highlight the need for innovation at the local level. So this really gives us that laser focus on really understanding what are the challenges of the farmers on the ground, how do we continue to innovate, and how do we bring in interoperable systems to those markets where we can partner with mobile banking, with mobile payment services, increase the transparency, and also offer access to crop insurance and loans as we continue to advance our partnerships around the world.
Guys, well, thank you very much, Ezgi. So you talked about the challenge of farmers on the ground vis-a-vis innovation, and innovation was also mentioned by all the speakers, because this is the theme of our discussion. So that brings me nicely to Theo, the president of the World Farmers Organization. Since we're talking about farmers, it would be good to hear from you and to ask you, how do you bring forward the farmers' perspectives, an active role on this issue of innovation, and especially on the role of digitalization of the agricultural sector?
Thank you. Still in 2021, food still comes from farms. Of course, there is a very small portion of our food that originates in laboratories and in factories, but most of it still comes from farms. Farming is still the biggest profession in the world. Hence, it's extremely important that farmers be involved in all these dialogues and debates on the transformation of food systems and how we can employ innovation and technologies to improve our food systems. It started off with producing food with our bare hands and then with hand hoes since about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And what a journey it has been up to today, where a lot of our food is being produced by modern machines, data and GPS-driven precision machines, and robotics, artificial intelligence, and blockchain to have the traceability. This made the world a very small place for farmers, and every farmer is every day in competition with the best other farmers in the world through global trade. But still, there are a large number of farmers, and in my home continent, Africa, a majority of farmers who work with hand hoes the way their ancestors have done 5,500 years ago. Unfortunately, efficiencies drive markets, and technologies and innovation drive efficiencies. Hence, when we rethink our food systems, and especially the footprint on biodiversity, nature, and climate, it is extremely important that we make sure that farmers down there at grassroots level take ownership of the transformation which is needed and come up with the solutions themselves too, or else they will never take ownership of it. And when I talk about innovation now, I do not only speak of mechanization and machines, I also speak of innovative ways to communicate with each other, innovative ways to link up with markets and consumers, and innovative ways to ensure that we leave nobody behind. And it is in this global approach that we need to rethink how we get the message across to farmers who are also consumers. The poorest people in the world today, and ironically, some of the most hungry people in the world, are food producers. So what we need to change is not merely the tool in the hand. What we need really to change is how we get food to hungry people. There's enough food in the world. Today, us as farmers produce enough food to feed every soul on the planet. But the food is not where the people are hungry, and it costs too much to get them there. And we waste around a third of the food, as we have heard. So it's about much more when it comes to innovation. It's about much more than just the tools. It's about the complete system.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Joe. It's really good to hear from you the perspective of farmers. And this is your last point on how to get the message across to farmers and to reach out to them. After the next speaker, I'd like to bring in Joe, if you could comment on this, and how do we reach out to farmers in terms of messaging and promotion of innovation. But let me invite now Torgny. Water obviously is an important issue for agriculture. Agriculture depends on it. And you're from the Stockholm International Water Institute. So it would be great really if you could share with us your thought on what is expected to happen, particularly on the Paris Agreement's implementation with regard to water.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, from a water perspective, I see that, as we know, the majority of water withdrawals on a daily basis is used for agriculture production. So I have three major challenges from a water perspective, how we can contribute from the water sector to a more sustainable food production system. Number one, of course, we need to grow more food with less water. The water is a finite resource, and we know that, as I mentioned, 70% of water withdrawals on a daily basis go for food production. Here we need to seek more new farming practices, more water-smart irrigation schemes, as well as for many smallholders, small farmers around the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we need to use traditional techniques, maybe in a new way of rainwater harvesting, to capture the rain, the water that is already there, and also to invest in less water-dependent and more nutritious crops, more crop per drop, as we say. That was the first challenge. Number one is to strengthen food security. We know the global warming will only become more frequent and more severe, and the droughts that will come in the years to come. And we need to alleviate that, but better access to small-scale irrigation, but also to improve the resilience of small farmers and smallholders, as has been said by many earlier speakers here in this session. And as I mentioned, there are techniques that we can improve. And I think combining that with finance, we have a lot of finance available, but I think it needs to be redirected or allocated in the millions of dollars to also support and finance smallholders around the world, maybe with techniques that they can afford in gaining their production of food. Finally, what we're discussing here in Glasgow today and these days, of course, is the climate issue. And we also need to reduce the carbon emission from agriculture, as we know that we need to introduce practices that strengthen the ability of landscapes to capture or sequester carbon, rather to risk to become an emitter of carbon. So in totally, how we manage water is most important. I think it's about innovation, but also about behavior. And yet we just finalize by mentioning that recently FAO and we ourselves, CEPAL, produced a report on that. From our part, it was Professor John Lundqvist, about smallholder, how farmers can become more resilient through a mixed approach, improve water management, to shift to more nutritious crops, and also to invest in safe water and sanitation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's really helpful. And we'll come back on the point you mentioned on innovation and behavior change. That's really important one, particularly vis-a-vis water and the use of water, or in general, not just in agriculture. So I'd like to bring in Joe, David, and Maria Helena, if you're all still with us. Let me start with Joe. And you're welcome to comment on any of the points were mentioned. I just want to suggest some of them. To you, Joe, on this issue of communication and really getting the message across to farmers and reaching out to farmers vis-a-vis innovation. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that question. And I think this idea that we have to deal with the last mile problem. This is the last mile problem. I'm going to say this with a huge amount of humility, but I think there is an arrogance in international organizations that, so long as we can supply, we can provide for all of the investments, the infrastructure, the engagement, etc., that practices should change, right? The theory of change in our minds is and should make a big difference. But I have to humbly submit that I think behavior change is a very different ballgame. We are recognizing this and apologies again, but we all have shibboleths in our minds, right? We're recognizing this with, say, farmer field schools. Farmer field schools, we know repeatedly with replication that the very strong evidence, they work really well in pilots and if you expand them a little bit, but in large scale, the quality of how farmer field schools, trainer of the trainers, all of that starts to diminish. So we need to ask the second order question. How should we deliver better? And I think really the responsibility is on us for us to try and inform that with good quality evidence, with testing, and then using that to scale up. So I wanted to present 4 ideas. That was the first one that I think the responsibility is ours. There's some amount of hubris that we have that we need to deal with and show greater humility, especially in thinking about, well, what works in changing behavior in the last mile. I think we have solutions. So, and that's the second idea I want to put forward. Remember that a few years ago, the big...
Yeah, sorry, Joe, if you could please be brief, because I want to bring in all the others. I want to be fair to all the panelists and the speakers.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
So remember that a few years ago that the key Nobel Prizes were given in behavioral science. One of the key things that are coming out from just a few examples is, if you change the timing of premium payments, insurance uptake becomes far better and far faster. Why aren't we using that in a lot of the mechanisms that we are using? And then the third idea is with respect to financial innovation. I think we can and should be thinking about things beyond things like catastrophe bonds. Resilience bonds have been used, but we are not using them sufficiently in developing countries. And the last idea is don't chop up resilience into climate resilience and the rest of resilience. Farmers tend to think of this in one cohesive way. That's something that IFAD is using, and I think we need to scale that idea up in a far better way. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And let me bring in David. David, your reaction, there's so many points were made there. How should we deliver better? Or perhaps the issue on communication, that innovation is not just about technology, but it's about communication as well. And you've been holding all these successful food system dialogues. So over to you. Just choose whatever perspective to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know the most important thing that I have learnt through the dialogue process is that things happen if we try not to control how they occur. And instead, if we create spaces where all different stakeholders can come together and to connect and to communicate with each other. The dominant features of the dialogues, just picking up on what I heard from His Excellency Thomas Jurado of Panama, the dominant feature has been this combination of ongoing climate change, the COVID pandemic, and conflict, in some cases significantly increasing. And these are interconnected issues, and they are really biting and hurting everywhere. To Tio de Jager, I'd want to say that the engagement of farmers in the dialogue process has been enormous and has grown throughout the last year and a half, and I hope it will go on. To our colleague, Tonje Holmgren, I just wanted to stress that water scarcity might be the most abundant challenge being faced in food systems everywhere, and it's getting worse. To our colleagues, particularly to Lisa Manley, just want to stress that the importance of engaging the private sector, larger entities as well as small and medium enterprises, is so clear. You can't transform food systems without partnering with the private sector, but we need to always remember the asymmetry of power relations, and I'm sure that you and others are super conscious of this, including those participating, so I don't need to go on about it. Thanks again for the chance to be here and for the chance to really appreciate the importance, increasing importance of food systems in relation to climate action. I think this is an issue that more and more people now understand, and I'm so glad it's featuring well in the discussions around COP26.
Thanks very much, David. And let me bring in Maria Helena Semedo. Now, Maria Helena, your perspective on the point you heard. I'm not sure if Maria Helena is still with us. I can see Eduardo, our dear colleague, who's the director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. So you've been following the discussion. There were so many points there on water, on reaching out to farmers. So please pick up any point you would like to add your perspective on, and that would be with pleasure. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Zitouni. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for those connected. Ms. Semedo had to leave because of another commitment here in Rome, and she gave me the honor to come and pass the key message that she quickly put up for us to bring the FAO. Extreme pleasure with the result of this session. Very honored to be here on her behalf. And I'll present what the notes that
check your sound. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You need to unmute yourself. The sound just stopped. Now we hear you. Now you're good. You're good.
You hear me?
Yes, you're good. You're good now.
Sorry. Learning to do these things is still 1 year plus after the Zoom and web context. My name is Eduardo Mansour. Ms. Semedo had to be in another meeting, and she apologized. She passed me the notes to speak on her behalf, on behalf of the FAO colleagues here in Rome that have been following this event, and we find it very, very important. Her note says that she, Madame Semedo, on behalf of the FAO colleagues, reflecting our positions here, are confident that the dialogues of this event are bring an important message to the COP. And that message is that this COP26 is our last chance to put the world back in track and avoid unequivocal, unprecedented, and even irreversible impacts of climate change in the agri-food systems. We want to see the agri-food systems, and we have the tools and means to see the agri-food systems as part of the solution. In one hand, they are critical for safeguarding our food security and nutrition. They are critical also for lifting people out of poverty. They are critical for the recovery of the current pandemic. And they contribute to the impacts of climate change, to ecosystem degradation, to biodiversity loss, the only ways that we look at forefront. And the Paris Agreement is offering this, as we see the NDCs. 95% of the NDCs bring agriculture now to the scenario. I was hearing the news from outside our system that agriculture is the big absent in this COP, but I don't agree with those news, because I think we are here exactly to revert that trend that agriculture has not been heard. We have heard inspiring solutions, Zitouni. We have been hearing enablers, including technological, financial innovation, digital solutions, indigenous traditional knowledge that can contribute to our work. Okay. The message is that transformation of our agri-food systems to become more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, more sustainable is possible, and can only happen if we work together and raise the ambition. FAO is working with more than 70 countries on the updating of the NDCs and the long-term strategies, specifically focused on agriculture, on land use systems. I think the goal of mobilizing $100 billion is driving all of us in this COP. We hope that by the end of the COP, we can all declare it a success, raise up our sleeves, and move into from discussion and from policies into practices. So this is a very positive message. We're delighted to have had the chance to be here and to use the next week at COP as an opportunity to foster these commitments, the partnerships, and unlocking innovation for agri-food systems. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Eduardo. Let me come back now to all the panelists, and you mentioned the point about the importance of agriculture at COP. It is very much present. In fact, there is a water pavilion as well in the COP, which is really very encouraging to go and look at. Now, I want to ask all the panelists, we have 10 minutes left, everyone, including Joe and David and Eduardo, what is it that you're asking the negotiators and the leaders here at COP26 with regard to scaling up innovation in agri-food systems? Okay, just one message from you that you would like something to happen. I'll start with you, Theo.
If a fairy would land on my shoulder and give me one wish, I would wish for an agreement on how to measure. Because what we cannot measure, we cannot manage.
Great, that's very nice and short. Esgi?
I would say more focus on adaptation in addition to mitigation. I think we need to build that resilience together with our partners, together with our communities, and we need to find ways to improve that adaptation. And we discussed behavior and innovation. I think those are the two big drivers in how we can shift that behavior and create more resilient future.
I mean, that's really an important point because it's true. I mean, there's been so much focus on mitigation, and now we see adaptation rising up the agenda. It's fantastic. And also resilience, obviously, because the pandemic has shown actually how vulnerable the agri-food systems are and the need for them to become resilient. Thomas?
I think it's including everybody, all countries, all farmers, all the persons that can give something new to this process. But we need the accomplishment of everybody.
Okay, thank you. Torgny?
Thanks. Combining what we're going through the last 18 months, the pandemic and the climate change, WMO recently shared a report that the next pandemic could become the droughts. So I would like to stress a systematic approach that you treat not climate change, food security and water management as three separate silos, go for them at once, bring them together. There we know that improved water management will help us to mitigate climate change and also strengthen food security.
Great, thank you. Joe? You need to unmute yourself. You can't. We can't hear you. Okay, well, let me give the floor to David, and we'll come back to you. Hopefully you can fix it. David? You're okay?
We can't, yeah, now the moderator has just unmuted
Oh, we're
us.
okay now.
Now you're okay. We can hear you. We can hear you, Joe.
Yeah, now it's possible now.
Okay.
On, without that possibility. So I think IFAD is focused on adaptation and the need for more financing on adaptation, but I want to say, and I know that another panelist made that point as well, but I want to say evidence on how to deliver better on adaptation is really key. We looked at global evidence on this, and we found that there was very little that could help us deliver better. And I think focusing also on evidence on this is really key. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. David?
Yes, please. Climate change, COVID, and other existential threats really hurt poorer people the most. They hurt poorer farmers quickest and hardest. And unless the negotiators can move towards a good deal that will really reduce emissions quickly, we're going to see widening gaps between those who have wealth and those who do not. And it will mean vastly increased numbers of hungry and poor people everywhere. We've already seen it as a result of COVID. We're seeing it as a result of climate change. And it is so saddening to see when we have the knowledge and the ability to stop this. Why on earth are we not doing so? Because the numbers are ratcheting up. And as we heard from so many brilliant speakers at the COP already, We just have to open our hearts to feel the suffering, and then surely we can work together to make a lasting difference.
Great, so thank you very much. I can see there are a number of questions on the chat, and there is one I'd like to bring in at least. But let me give the floor to Eduardo first, briefly on your reaction, or do you want to wait until you do the conclusion?
Look, that is, if you ask me now, it's, I would say, all of the above, because the points raised were brilliant. The climate, food, water, financing nexus is what we expect that negotiation will bring us. And adaptation must be in the top. Let me remind what the Secretary General mentioned a few days ago in his speech, that 25% of the fund goes for adaptation and climate financing, only 1% of the private sector fund goes for adaptation. There's something wrong there. We have to fix that.
Okay, it's okay, thank you. We talked about innovation, and innovation is not only about hard technology, as you said, and Theo. And there is a question here that said, is it better to promote compost and mulch than blockchain? So this is an interesting question, but I don't expect everyone to answer it because we only have 5 minutes left. But put your hands up if you would like to answer this question. Is it better to promote compost and mulch than blockchain? Ezgi, I wonder if there's a private sector, perhaps you can give your perspective.
I think so. Well, thank you for the question. I think what you're trying to get at is if we're promoting compost and mulch and improving soil health, how does that help around, versus building or growing transparency, traceability through blockchain initiatives? I would say it's not a trade-off. We have to do both. Yes. And we are doing this in many markets around the world. We know that soil health is at the center of regenerative agriculture. And as we're building climate resilience and we're enhancing water security around, water and food security around the world, this is definitely going to be a growing focus for us, especially in rain-fed regions. But blockchain is definitely a technology that us at ABI, we have been implementing to get closer to that farmer, to be able to improve their visibility within our supply chain. Because in many cases, what we find out is that we work very directly with these farmers, but they don't have proof of how they exist in our supply chain. So then they cannot go and get financing, they cannot get crop insurance. So that blockchain application through a simple SMS text message can give them a record of the sales so that they can prove that they exist in the supply chain of a private sector player. That allows them access to greater financial instruments. And I think that's definitely, so I would say the question is great, but we need both. We need the focus on soil health and regen ag, as well as the transparency and traceability.
Oh, thank you. That's really a good point. We need both. And I think this also draws the parallel between needing both innovation in sort of the hard technology and others, but also promotion of nature-based solutions. And I think David has been well engaged, back in the the climate summit in 2019, where the nature-based solutions came up, and also through the food system summit. So perhaps, David, you can give your perspective on this question as well. Did you hear my...
Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, okay.
Zituni, I'm so glad that the question has been asked, because as far as I'm concerned, getting nature-based actions into the climate debate, and then as part of the shifts that are necessary, is so important. I would also wish to say, last point, that we need to be sure that our efforts to encourage the shift in food systems so that they are more compatible with climate action and reduce the destruction of nature need to take account of all the different perspectives in that different situations. And that means being ready to adopt a multi-component response. And I suspect that's what you were getting at with your, what the previous speaker was getting at by saying we need both. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of comments and questions there, and I can't see any hand raised from our panelists and colleagues joining us virtually. And we have 3 minutes left. So perhaps I'll ask you, Eduardo, since Maria Helena Semedo is not available, just to conclude in 2 minutes before we close.
Thank you, Zituni. It's just a big thank you from Maria Elena Semedo and all of us in FAO for the important dialogue. I think we capture elements here that are going to be helpful for us throughout these next few days in the COP and beyond. I think the highlights have been made very clear by the colleagues. I wouldn't like to re-emphasize what has been already said, but to thank you and to confirm the FAO commitment and availability to work across with the partners for us to make this change, to bring agri-food systems as part of the solutions to the climate crisis.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, David, Joe, and Eduardo, and everyone who's joining me here in the panel, also in person. It's been a really pleasure having this dialogue with you. Thank you also to all the colleagues behind the scene who helped us make this event. It's been challenging in terms of logistics. So particularly big thanks to Julia and Emily and Leva and Tina and all the team. And also the team here. There's a fantastic team here doing all the technical support. The studio here is amazing. The technology is really incredible. Big screens, everything is clear. It works really well. I think it's a great demonstration of the hybrid format that we can have people from all around the world joining discussion. So it's really great. So again, thank you, everyone. We're finishing 1 minute earlier. That's great. Okay, well, thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.